You ever feel like you're being watched, even when you're completely alone? It was that kind of night. 2 summers ago, I was driving home from a day trip to celebrate my son Ethan's 16th birthday. We'd spent the day splashing around at a water park and decided to grab dinner in a little town we stumbled upon, somewhere off the beaten path. Google Maps had led us on a wild goose chase, and we ended up in this tiny place called Silverwood. We were tired, a bit lost, but the smell of funnel cakes and the distant hum of a county fair caught our attention. We figured, why not? One last hurrah before the day ended. The fair was winding down when we arrived. Most of the attractions had already packed up, but we noticed a tractor pull was just getting started. It wasn't something we'd ever seen before, so we parked ourselves on the bleachers. The crowd was a mix of families and a few tipsy locals. I had Ethan and my friend Lisa with me, so despite the odd vibe, I felt secure. As the event ended, we decided to head out before the roads got too dark. As we left the fairgrounds and walked back to the diner where we'd parked, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It was just a fleeting thought, and I brushed it off, but it left a sour taste in my mouth. We climbed into my car and set off, backtracking the way we came to find the main highway. The road was quiet, lined with thick trees on either side, the kind of road that swallows sound and makes you feel like you're the only person left in the world. Not long after pulling out of the diner, I noticed a car trailing behind us. It was odd because the road was so empty. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they were also from out of town, maybe lost like we were. But as we drove on, the car stayed right on my tail, matching every turn and speed change. My unease grew into something sharper. The road twisted and turned, dipping into valleys and rising over hills. The car behind me didn't falter, its headlights glaring in my rearview mirror like accusing eyes. I slowed down, hoping they'd get impatient and pass me. Instead, they edged closer, almost kissing my bumper. I dared to glance over at Lisa, and her expression mirrored my own tight-lipped, eyes wide with a fear we hadn't acknowledged out loud. It was dark now, the kind of dark where the trees seemed to close in on you. I pushed the gas pedal harder, trying to put some distance between us and this relentless shadow, but they kept pace, playing a twisted game of cat and mouse. I had Ethan in the backseat, and the thought of something happening to him made my chest tighten with a cold dread. What had started as a fun detour had turned into a nightmare. We finally hit the interstate, and I breathed a sigh of relief, hoping the driver would back off now that we were on a main road. But they didn't. Instead, they sped up, sticking to us like a second skin. I pushed the car faster, the speedometer climbing, but no matter what I did, they stayed with us. Desperation clawed at my mind. I laid on the horn, hoping to startle them, to make them back off, but all they did was pull onto the shoulder and kill their headlights. For a moment, I thought it was over, but something felt wrong. My instinct screamed at me that this wasn't finished. I sped up, trying to put as much distance as I could between us and whatever madness was following. For a while, nothing happened. Started to relax. Then, out of nowhere, those same headlights flared to life, right beside us. They've been following us with their lights off, waiting, watching. Anger surged through me, replacing the fear. How dare they do this on my son's birthday? I slammed the gas pedal to the floor, but they matched my speed, swerving toward us, trying to force us off the road. Up ahead, I saw the faint glow of a semi-truck's taillights. It felt like our only chance. I aimed the car straight for it, hugging the truck's back as closely as I could, praying the driver would understand. The truck driver must have sensed something was wrong. After what felt like an eternity of this terrifying dance, a semi swerved into the fast lane, cutting off the maniac chasing us. He tapped his brakes, and I saw my chance. I floored it, swerving into the slow lane and rocketing forward. The truck blocked the other car, giving us the opening we needed. I didn't slow down until I saw the familiar lights of my hometown. I took a sharp left onto a side street, darting toward a well-lit gas station. There, I spotted a police car parked near the entrance. We pulled in, and Lisa jumped out to explain the situation to the officer. I couldn't bring myself to leave the car, not yet. My hands were trembling too badly to do much more than grip the steering wheel and stare out at the darkness beyond the station's lights. The cop called for backup, and they set out to find the guy, but we didn't stick around to see if they caught him. We called a friend to follow us home, leaving my car at a parking lot overnight, just in case. I didn't want him finding out where we lived. For weeks after, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I saw a car that even remotely resembled the one that followed us, my heart would skip a beat. But what kept me up most nights was a chilling thought I couldn't banish. That little town had been home to one of the largest mental asylums in the region, and I couldn't help but wonder if, on that dark road, we'd cross paths with one of its escapes. It's been about 15 years since that day, but the memory is still sharp enough to make my skin crawl. Sometimes when I'm alone, it creeps back up on me, and I can't help but wonder just how close we came to something truly horrifying. I was 25 at the time. Not really a kid, but not quite ready to leave the youthful irresponsibility behind. My cousins, my brother, and I had packed up and hit the road, heading for our family's timeshare at Sapphire Cove, a secluded beach town on the California coast. My parents, aunt, and grandma had gotten a head start. As they always do, my dad's the type who believes in sticking to a schedule down to the last minute. Meanwhile, the four of us were running an hour behind, thanks to my brother's usual tardiness. We were cruising along, somewhere outside a place called Devil's Basin. If you've ever been through there, you know I'm talking about a desolate stretch of desert that seems to go on forever, broken only by the occasional rundown gas station or abandoned shack. It's the kind of place that gives you the creeps, even in broad daylight. It was around 4 p.m. when we saw the car pulled off the road, half buried in the sand. As we passed, my brother suddenly said, "There's a guy lying in the desert." At first, we weren't sure what to do. None of us had cell services, being the days before everyone had a smartphone glued to their hand. I managed to get a weak signal if I held my phone just right, but it wasn't enough to make a call. We decided to turn back just to see if the guy was okay. My brother and my cousin's boyfriend, Nick, got out and started yelling, asking if he needed help. The guy didn't respond, just lay there in the sand. It was eerie the way he was so still, like something out of a bad horror movie. But then as they stepped closer, my cousin and I noticed something that made our blood run cold. There were two figures crouching behind the car's trunk, trying to stay out of sight. We screamed for the guys to get back in the car. They must have heard the rustling because they bolted, not bothering to look back. As they dove into the car, the guy lying in the sand suddenly sat up, and the two figures behind the car jumped out, looking every bit as dangerous as we'd feared. Nick slammed on the gas, and we tore out of there, hearts pounding. I finally managed to get enough signal to call 911. The dispatcher took our information and said they'd send someone out, but I wasn't about to stick around and wait. We kept driving, putting as much distance as we could between us and Devil's Basin. Eventually, we pulled into a place called Baker, thinking we'd be safe enough to take a breather. We stopped at a diner called the Blue Oasis, a little place known for its strawberry shakes and gyros. As we were waiting for our order, Nick suddenly went pale. He pointed out the window, and my stomach dropped. The same car from the desert had just pulled in, parking 3 spaces down from us. The 3 guys who had ambushed us were getting out, looking around as if they were searching for something or someone. Panic set in, but we kept our heads. As they walked into a nearby trading post, we quickly grabbed our food to go and devise a plan to get out of town without being noticed. Fortunately, luck was on our side. An RV was parked between our SUV and their car, blocking their view. The moment they stepped out of the trading post carrying a case of beer, they jumped back into their car and sped off down the highway like bats out of hell. We didn't waste a second. We ran to our car, jumped in, and hit the road, not stopping until we were safely inside the walls of Sapphire Cove. To this day, I never heard back from the police about what happened, and none of us ever breathed a word of it to our parents, aunt, or grandma. But the memory lingers, and the fear is still real. I can't bring myself to take that shortcut through Devil's Basin anymore. Some places are just cursed, and I'd rather not tempt fate twice. I lived in Arizona for a few years before moving to the Midwest, but nothing I've experienced since has ever come close to what happened to me and my friend Lena one fateful afternoon in March 2010. We had a habit of exploring the most remote corners of the state, seeking out abandoned ghost towns and soaking in the desolate beauty of the desert, but that day our love for the open road almost cost us everything. We were heading back from Canyon Point to Phoenix, taking the scenic route as always. The direct highways never held much appeal. We preferred the lonely back roads, the ones that felt like they belonged to another era. That day, we found ourselves on Arizona 61, a 2-lane strip of asphalt cutting through the vast emptiness. It was the kind of road where you could drive for miles without seeing another soul. The desert stretched out on either side, flat and barren, with nothing but dirt and rock between the rare, tiny towns that dotted the map. We were completely alone, at least that's what we thought. It was around mid-afternoon when we spotted a white pickup truck in the distance, moving slowly ahead of us. We didn't think much of it until, without warning, it stopped dead in the middle of the highway, blocking both lanes. Lena and I exchanged uneasy glances. There was no reason for anyone to stop out here, and certainly not like that. As we got closer, the tension in the car grew. We were the only other vehicle on the road, and with no cell service, turning back seemed like a bad idea. When we were about half a mile away, the truck suddenly pulled off to the side, but it was still facing in our direction. Relief washed over us, though it was short-lived. We passed by the truck, glancing at the driver, a middle-aged man with a stern expression, his eyes locked on us. He was speaking into a walkie-talkie. The moment we drove past, he pulled back onto the road and started following us. Not closely at first, but just enough to make us uncomfortable. He'd close the gap, then drop back, only to speed up again. Panic began to set in as we realized just how isolated we were. There was no one around, and no one knew we'd taken this detour. Our phones were useless in the dead zone of the Arizona desert. Lena gripped the steering wheel tighter, pushing the speedometer higher as I frantically searched the map for an alternate route. But there was nothing, just mile after mile of empty road. Then up ahead, we saw another truck approaching us slowly, barely crawling along at 20 miles per hour. This one was old and battered, a stark contrast to the newer vehicle trailing us. As we flew past it, our nerves on edge, we saw the driver, another middle-aged man, also speaking into a walkie-talkie. A chill ran down my spine. The white pickup truck behind us caught up with the old one, and as we watched in the rearview mirror, the second truck pulled a U-turn and fell in behind its partner. They were working together, there was no doubt about it, and we were the prey. For the first time in my life, I felt truly hunted. They stayed right on our tail, the white truck edging closer and closer, the driver's intent clear. He was trying to ram us off the road. The old truck followed closely behind, as if waiting for its moment. Lena floored it, pushing our car past 80, then 90 miles per hour. The road was straight and deserted, but any mistake at that speed could be deadly. We weren't going to slow down, not with those two on our back. The white truck pulled into the opposite lane, attempting to overtake us. We knew what he was trying to do, box us in with his buddy behind us, trapping us with nowhere to go. Our eyes darted to the sides of the road, searching for an escape. But the desert was unforgiving, rocky, and treacherous. Off-roading might be our only option, but it was a risky one. As we crested a small hill, a sign appeared on the horizon, Mesa Ridge National Monument. 1 mile and just ahead, a blue pickup truck emerged from a side road, pulling onto the highway right in front of us. It had a U.S. Park Service plate. The moment the blue truck appeared, both of the pickups behind us slammed on their brakes and executed sharp U-turns, speeding back the way they came. It was like they vanished into thin air. We followed the Park Service truck all the way to the nearest town, our nerves frayed and our hearts still racing. Once we reached safety, we made our way back to Phoenix, the events of that day replaying over and over in our minds. I don't know what those men had planned, but I'm certain it was nothing good. I reported the incident to the state police, but all they could do was promise to keep an eye on the area. That part of Arizona is a vast, empty place, one where secrets can hide for decades without ever coming to light. Years later, I can't help but think about the darkness that lurks out there hidden in the desolation. Whether it was something sinister like a human predator or a meth lab territory, I'll never know. But I do know this: I'll never take a back road without thinking twice again.